Welcome back to Mighty Habits, everybody. I'm Steven, and today we're diving into something that's been kind of bugging me lately. You know how we humans, we like to think we're all about logic and reason, right? But then we turn around and get all riled up about politics and religion like it's a football game. So today we're going to take a deep dive into that very question. Why do we find ourselves on opposite sides of the fence, even when we think we're being totally reasonable? We'll be looking at some super interesting insights from social psychology and brain science, kind of like peeking behind the curtain of our own minds. And trust me, it's going to be way more fun than trying to solve one of those Rubik's Cube things blindfolded. You ever notice how like a simple dinner conversation about, current events can suddenly turn into like a war zone? It's like someone swapped out your decaf with like a triple shot of espresso, am I right?
Right,
But
yeah.
there's actually a ton of fascinating stuff going on beneath the surface of all that heated debate. We often assume that our beliefs, they come from, logic and careful consideration of the evidence. But the truth is a little more complicated and honestly a lot more entertaining. So get ready to unravel the mystery of why we humans love to disagree, because it's going to be a wild ride. Turns out our emotions, they play like a way bigger role in shaping our moral judgments than we tend to think. Like if you ever notice how people get so like defensive when someone challenges their political or religious beliefs, it's almost like you insulted their favorite sports team or something. But it's because deep down our beliefs, they're all tangled up with our sense of identity and like who we belong with. It's kind of like imagine you're at a concert right now,
Yeah.
surrounded by thousands of people all singing along to your favorite band. There's this amazing feeling of unity, like a shared experience that connects you to something bigger than yourself. And then suddenly some guy in the crowd starts yelling about how the band is terrible and their music is garbage. You'd probably feel a surge of anger, right? And not just because you disagree with their musical taste, it's because they're like disrupting that shared experience, that feeling of belonging you have with the rest of the crowd. And the same thing happens with our political and religious beliefs. We gravitate towards groups that share our values and our worldview, and those shared beliefs, they become part of who we are. So when someone challenges those beliefs, it feels like an attack on the group itself, on our sense of belonging. And that triggers a seriously strong emotional response. And this leads to a really interesting concept that social psychologists call belonging versus believing. Basically, it suggests that sometimes our need to belong, to be part of a tribe, it can actually override our need to be factually correct or even logically consistent. We'd rather fit in with our group than risk being like the odd one out, even if deep down we have some doubts. Now, this instinct to belong, it's not a bad thing in itself. I mean, it's what allows us to form communities and cooperate and achieve amazing things together. But it does have a potential downside too. It can create these echo chambers where we only hear information that confirms what we already believe, which makes it way harder to consider other perspectives or challenge the status quo.
Kind of like being stuck in a musical playlist that only plays your favorite genre. You might be missing out on some awesome tunes. To really get this point, let's try a slightly weird analogy. Human behavior and beehives. Think about how a beehive works for a second. Each bee has its own specific job, and they all work together for the good of the hive. Now imagine one rebellious bee decides to go rogue and ignore all the rules and norms. The other bees wouldn't be too happy about that, right? They'd probably try to steer that rogue bee back on track or even kick it out of the hive to keep things running smoothly. In a similar way, our social groups, they have their own sets of norms and expectations. We get rewarded when we conform to those norms, through praise, acceptance, or social status. But when we stray from the norm, we might face criticism or even exclusion. It's like this invisible pressure that keeps us aligned with the group's values and beliefs, even if those beliefs aren't always based on hard facts or logic. Now, this doesn't mean we're all just mindless drones following the hive mind. We still have our own individual thoughts and feelings and the ability to reason.
But understanding these social dynamics, this interplay of belonging and believing, can help us see why disagreements get so heated and why it can be so tough to change someone's mind, especially about beliefs they hold dear. So what does all this mean for us out here in the real world? How do we navigate these complex social forces and have better, more productive conversations with people who see things differently? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore after a quick break, so stay tuned. And we're back, folks, to Mighty Habits. We've been digging deep into why we humans seem to love arguing about stuff like politics and religion. And you know what? It turns out our emotions and this deep need to belong, they're pulling a lot more strings than we realize. But let's switch gears for a second, think about what we can actually do with all this new knowledge. How can we use these insights to navigate the real world and have, better, more constructive conversations with people who have different views?
Well, first off, it's super important to remember that everyone's moral compass, their set of values and principles, it's shaped by so many different factors.
Like, think about it. Their upbringing, their cultural background, their personal experiences, all that stuff. It's like a fingerprint,
Yeah.
totally unique to each individual. And just because someone's moral fingerprint doesn't perfectly match ours, doesn't mean they're wrong or bad or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It just means it's different, you know? So next time you find yourself in one of those, heated debates about politics or religion, just take a deep breath and remember the person you're talking to, they're not necessarily evil or stupid. They're just coming at it from a different moral framework. That's all. So instead of trying to win the argument or prove them wrong, try to actually understand where they're coming from. Ask questions, listen, really listen, and try to find some common ground. You might be surprised at what you discover. And remember that beehive analogy we talked about earlier, Instead of trying to cram everyone into the same hive with identical beliefs, maybe we should celebrate the fact that we have different perspectives and work on creating a society where different hives can, coexist peacefully and even productively.
It's a challenge for sure, but it's a super important one if we want a healthy and thriving society. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of moral psychology and all the crazy forces that shape what we believe. I hope you found it insightful and maybe even learned a thing or two. I'm Stephen Alum, and thanks for joining me on Mighty Habits. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.